I prefer sitting. Actually, my other microphone has a cut in the cord, and then I've had some people say when I move around, my voice falls off as I move my head. Is it doing that now? So I think I'll stay with this. That way it sounds a little better. Yeah, I really wasn't asking your opinion there over there. Yeah, I was just telling you what I was doing. It's the way I do it in my house. Huh? Yeah, well, I plan to use it now from now on. Yeah. Well, no, since the cord was cut, I figured this would be a great opportunity to swap the two out. Well, since I cut the cord, it was me. No, I'm kidding. It's a microphone. All it is just instead of being clipped here, it's stuck here. So, but it works. Can you believe that we have yet to go back to 1 Samuel since like the second week to the end of November? You didn't miss a thing. I postponed it so everyone would get a chance to pick back up where we left off. This is a pretty good. This is a book of a great deal of intrigue. I mean, it's like a really bad episode of Snapped meets the Old Testament. And tonight it will be a really bad episode of Snapped meeting the Old Testament scriptures. If you're into violent movies, you could make one from this chapter.
What about Judges?
Well, I know Judges is a pretty violent book. Well, it's not a horrible book in itself.
When the preacher picks out pieces here and there over the last 55 years, you don't put it all together. But with this reading it,
yeah. Yeah.
I've been reading, I'm behind. Okay.
That's okay. I got a little behind. I'm not worried about it.
Judges. Judges is scary.
Isn't it?
I didn't know that was Judges' time.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing. You look at it, and part of what happens in the Judges period is being carried over in the 1 Samuel. This is a transition from the judges to the monarchy. And I mean, one of the most condemning statements comes at the end of the book of Judges or the book of Ruth. It doesn't really matter. Ruth and the book of Judges are they're not going on at the same time because there's a great deal of time going on in the book of Judges. But Ruth comes in towards the end of the book of Judges, probably about this time with a little bit before Saul as king. And what you have is the most condemning statement. In the day in Israel when there was no king, and men did what was right in their own eyes. That's a hugely condemning statement.
Over and over and over.
Yeah.
That paragraph you just said.
Yeah.
Where the people did what they thought was good. And so was it okay because they did?
No, because if you look at the cycle in Judges, which has nothing to do with this, but it's cool. Because if you guys want to pursue this, we could pursue this and then get to this or whatever. I'm very flexible. The Old Testament is my thing. I took a whole master's degree just in Old Testament. I've translated a huge section, translated the book of Judges. Which is why this morning when I said their translations were wrong and mine was right, I wasn't joking. Their translation was wrong and mine was right. Really. No, that would have been arrogant if I couldn't have done it. What is it? Yogi Berra says it ain't bragging. No, it's Ted Williams. It ain't bragging if you can do it. Yeah.
So we're in 1 Samuel what?
1 Samuel 22, but I'm going to answer a question out of the book of Judges.
When you start with Judges, I have a whole page of questions.
Well, we can go to Judges. That's fine. I kind of like doing that. The great thing about the book of Judges is it's a cyclic book. It's a book that runs on a cycle. There's peace in the land. The people sin. God sends a persecutor. The people cry out. God raises up a hero. The hero slaughters the bad guy. There's peace in the land. And you think, they've got it. And then it goes, and the people committed sin in the eyes of God. And it starts all, it's like a giant perpetual motion machine. Woof, woof, woof. And you figure, and one of the great things about the Judges, when I was taught inner city youth, I taught this, and the youth went, these people are morons. I said, yeah, they are. They're stupid. I said, yeah, they are. Man, I said, so let me ask you, have you stopped following the cycle of sin? It's because this is my description of my life. Well, I'm not going out and, offering my family to an idol or something, but, really, there's really some cool stuff in there. You've got Jephthah, you've got Ehud, the left-handed judge. You have Shamgar, who kills 300 men with an ox goad. You've got great old Samson, who kills people, and then, all the great things he does while thumbing his nose at God. And so the book of Judges is a phenomenal book. A lot of your rich teaching is really in the Old Testament. But a lot of pastors stay away from the Old Testament because to set up many of the passages requires a great deal of historical content that they just don't have. And so they jump in and they'll do a few topical sermons and they'll pop out. And a lot of pastors love the New Testament because the history is more current. It's something that you know more of. And so I tend towards the Old Testament, yet while I've been here, I've almost gone old to new, old to new, old to new, old to new, old to new. So, like Haggai. How many of you have ever read the book of Haggai? Very enlightening sermon series. Very difficult Hebrew. Isaiah is the most difficult Hebrew in the text. You want to torment somebody, send it to Isaiah to translate. There is one word that is an extremely rare form that only exists one time in all of written Hebrew, and it exists once in Isaiah. And I had a Hebrew prof send his class there. And they came crying to me, like, it's your problem, man. 1 Samuel 22. Let's catch ourselves up previously in 1 Samuel. I've got to get that thing that goes, ka-chink, 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 ka-chink. 24 fans? 24. Where's the light? She's not here. So, and every question I asked her, I've never seen that movie. I've never seen that movie. Previously in 1 Samuel, David is fleeing from Saul. This is after the plot has been discovered to kill Saul. And Jonathan and David concoct this. Hey, I'll hide behind a rock and you shoot arrows towards the rock. This would never happen in the army. That's a range violation if I've ever seen one. You shoot arrows at me, and if they go past me and you tell the boy to go a little bit further down, I know Saul's going to kill me and I'll beat feet and nobody will see me anymore. And then he goes to Nob, where the priests live, and he asks the priest for food. And the priest says, I have nothing but the showbread, right? And I need a sword. And notice, we talked about how David tells a lie. Doesn't he? I am on an important mission from the king to go this way. And we broke down what the lie was about and the reason why he tells the lie. And the reason why he tells the lie is to provide protection for the priest. We'll see this in 22. Because if the priest aids David because he knows that David is fleeing the king, the priest is now a fellow conspirator, is he not? If the priest aids David believing he's an agent for the king, is he a conspirator? No! Thank you. So, 1 Samuel 22. We're not going to look at all of it. We're going to bounce around for some of it. Now, starting in verse 6. Now Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under a tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand. He's always got a spear. No, he can't. I mean, he's wrong pitch Mitch all day long. I mean, he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with the spear. How many times has he tried to kill David with a spear? 3. Tried to kill Jonathan once. Brother is 0 for 4. 0 for 4. But he's still got a spear in his hand. Sounds like the Dallas Cowboys or Bob on the fob. When I was deployed, we had these people. I was a fobbit for a while. A fobbit was a guy that stayed on a fob. I went off the fob as much as I could, but primarily my life was confined to the forward operating base. You'd see these guys come off there. They get out of their truck. Their weapon is some of them just basically have sights and a flashlight and maybe their laser, and that's all they got. But you'll see the fobbit, man. He's got all the cool guy. His weapon is 40 pounds of cool guy gear. Couldn't hit a thing with it, but it looks cool. Saul's a fobbit. He can't hit squat with his spear. Notice when it was time to go out and fight, where was he when Goliath showed up? In his tent. Tallest man in Israel, hiding in his tent. Standing there with a spear in his hand, thinking of who to throw it at next. And Saul said to his servant who stood with him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and tens of thousands, that all you have conspired against me?" Is Saul in his right mind? What is Saul seeing every time he looks at his bodyguards now? Conspirators, right? Everybody hates you. This usually is the sign of the malicious, malignant dictator. It's great when the king loves you because he throws upon you great things. But when he does not like you, you are going to disappear. Saddam Hussein was very much that way. Man, if you were in his inner circle, great. But if you did something he didn't like, you were never heard of again, and your name wasn't mentioned anymore. When you're a hammer, everything in the world is a nail. When you're conspiracy crazy, everyone is a conspirator. And we'll see where this really comes to haunt Saul's kingdom. No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me. Yeah, to lies in wait as at that day. Then answers Doeg the Edomite. Remember Doeg? Doeg was at Nob when David shows up and asks for bread and Goliath's sword. He's a chief shepherd for Saul. So Doeg sees an opportunity and he's going to take it. So Doeg then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul. "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of anyhow, we'll just go right on to Tub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." As though there's more than one Goliath. "And the king summoned Ahimelech, the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all of his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all who came with him. And Saul said, 'Hear now, son of Ahitub.' And he answered, 'I am here, Lord. I am here, my lord.' And Saul said to him, 'Why have you what? Conspired against me with the son of Jesse?'" Now, if we go back and read the story, does Ahimelech conspire with David? Matter of fact, David goes into great pains to keep him out, to allow him plausible deniability. I mean, it's kind of, you'd have to be, dense as a lead balloon to not figure out that you're on the lam because you show up on an urgent mission for the king. "Oh, I forgot bread. And I drove off without my weaponry." And it's an urgent message. Going into enemy territory without a weapon. So, can you give me a weapon and some food? He probably kind of pieced it together. But he doesn't conspire with him. Notice what's happening here. Who does Saul first blame as conspirators? His bodyguards. Who then does he blame? The priests. Is this the mark of a stable king? He's got a mental disorder. Now, I have worked for people like this, and they're nuts. And when you go in, you're wondering which guy is showing up today. The benevolent guy or the guy who pulls you aside and goes, they're all against me. Every single one of them. The only one I trust is you today. They typically tend to be control freaks. Have you heard my theory on how you defeat a control freak? This is great. When I worked in Italy, I had my first chaplain that I worked for was a super control freak that couldn't make a decision no matter what you did. I need more information. I need more information. Sir, there is no more information. The garrison commander is on the phone needing to know whether you want the blue pill or the red pill. Just pick one, sir. We'll execute whatever mission you choose, we'll execute. I need more information. I need more information. So the colonel is line one. He wants to talk to you. I can't answer any of his questions, so I have more information. He's not asking. After a while, I started taking a little bit of slight fun out of tormenting this man, because with a control freak that needs information, the way you overwhelm them is you give them every bit of information you can find. Any extraneous data that might have bearing on the topic at hand, you put in a separate email. You blow up his email box with as many emails as you can find on all the data you can have on this, and just flood him. And then sit and listen to his computer explode. I know, that was a bit malicious, but it was fun. Saul's a control freak. Saul is a very paranoid individual. What bred this problem? A little ditty that pricked his pride. David. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And now he's accusing his bodyguards. Now he's accusing the priests. Now he's taking counsel from an Edomite. And here's the thing. Edomites, while related to the Jews, don't get any of the promises for the Jews. They are actually natural enemies. Edomites are the sons of Esau. Thank you for playing. One of the greatest Edomites that you'll ever know of is Herod the Great. He was an Idumean. That was free. It's just for you. Huh? Yeah, Kyle's charging, mine's free. So Doeg the Edomite stood, and he gives this story that they gave him provisions and the sword, and the king sent and summoned, and we've already read that. Why have you conspired? We've read that. That he had given him the bread and the sword, and have inquired to God for him, so that he has risen up against me to lie in wait. Is David lying in wait for Saul? No, he is in Gath, drooling from the mouth like a crazy man. Ahimelech answered the king, and whom among all your servants is so faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law and the captain of your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? Ahimelech's response is simply this. Hey, look, David was the captain of your guards. The very men that are with you right now, David was in charge of. David has married your daughter. David has been honored at your table. David has killed the giant whose sword is actually his. It's not yours. All these things David has done, and he's been an honored guest in your house. Why now would I ever think that he has conspired against you? Why would I not accept him as a servant from you, give him the bread that he's asked for and the sword that he requested, and not assume anything other than you have sent him? This is a legitimate response, is it not? How many of you have ever been caught in a conversation like this where someone believes that you've done something, and no matter how much you claim it wasn't you, do you change their mind? No. No, I know it was you. It wasn't me. I know it was you. How do you know it was me? Because I know. But it wasn't me. Oh, I know it was you. No, really, it wasn't me. I know it was you. I wasn't even in town that day. Oh, I know. Okay, then. Usually people like that, you should take the pin out of their weapon. Is the first day the first time I've inquired of God him? No. Let the king not impute any of his servants at all the house of my father. For your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. I didn't know what he was doing. David has come to me. He asked for me to pray for him. He asked for me to seek God's face for him. He asked for bread and he asked for a sword, and David didn't tell him anything other than that. That is the crime of Ahimelech. You want to care to guess what the sentence is for Ahimelech? You will surely die. You and all your father's house. Now, it's not that priests were untouchable. There's only a handful of times in the Bible where priests are killed. There's twice in the book of 1 Samuel. The first one was Hophni, Phinehas, and Eli, and they were killed because they were wretches. They were also killed by a foreign hand. This guy isn't. You go back a little bit further, you can go to the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, who offered, and this is what the text says, and people go, well, what does that mean? We don't know what they did, but the strange fire that they offered before the Lord was enough that made him so mad, he just killed them both. They're kind of off limits because they're kind of not armed. Right? We have kind of a chivalrous code. They did it as well. You don't kill people that are not combatants until after the battle's over, and then you kill everybody in their place. But you don't go into war and go, hey, let's go kill their priests because they're not armed. That's kind of a cowardly thing to do. If you look at the Philistines, notice what they did. They sent a champion out and challenged for a champion. So it's kind of an odd thing to say, I'm going to kill a priest. Now, think about the mental capacity of a wicked man to lay their hand upon the anointed priest of God. This is some audacity, is it not? David is going to exemplify the correct manner even against an evil king. On multiple chances, two that we will see, David has the opportunity to kill Saul, once when he's sleeping and once when he's using the facilities. Both times he's completely exposed to being killed. And David's response to his men who says, you're more than justified to kill this man, is what? I will not what? I will not lay my hand upon the Lord's anointed. But Saul has no issue killing a priest. Oh, but he doesn't kill them, does he?
He doesn't do it, he has somebody else do it.
He has somebody else do it. That's the sign of another great characteristic of leadership. Not, I'm not going to get my hands dirty with this, I'll pay someone else to do it. We see this going back to the 1 Samuel 17, where he has someone else kill the giant. This is a common denominator with this young man, with this king. You shall surely die, you and your house. The king said to his guard who stood with me, turn and kill the priest of the Lord. But their hand also is with David. because her hand is also with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The bodyguard, which until a day earlier answered to David, would no. We're not doing it. We got that you're the king. We got that you were endowed with power. We got that we answer to you. We've got all those things. Here's the problem. You cannot ask us to murder individuals who are not complicit in a crime because you're paranoid. Right? It's not in there, but I guarantee you that would be the conversation. How many of you ever seen the movie Gladiators? Fairly violent movie. If you haven't seen it, Delight will probably tell me she hasn't seen it. Probably a good thing that she hasn't and give her PTSD. Towards the end of the movie, the protagonist and the antagonist are in the arena. The emperor and Maximus, the general who was supposed to keep the emperor Commodus from ascending the throne, and all of a sudden the emperor loses his sword and he turns to his Praetorian Guard and says, "Give me a sword." And the general of the Praetorian Guard says, "No." It took a lot of guts for that general to do so, because if the emperor wins, that guy dies. It took a lot of guts for that bodyguard to say no. Why? He's the king. Go all the way back in 1 Samuel when Samuel says, look, when you ask for a king, your sons become the property of the king, your land becomes the property of the king, the taxes become the property of the king, your men will go and serve and fight in his wars because he is the king. He will rule over you. And these men say no. Now, rightly, they should. I mean, you look at the interplay. Is this a moral order? In the army, would this be an actionable order? Not at all. Not at all. We kind of saw that in Nazi Germany when they actually killed not just Jews, but multiple millions of people. Gypsies, Jews, Christians, the list goes on. What was the defense? I was following orders. I was following orders. Did that count at the Nuremberg trials? Not a bit. That's right. These men could have said, well, we're following orders, he's the king, and killed him. But notice that's not what they did. So what happened? Let's take a look here. Let's take a look at what happens here. Because we're not done with Doeg. He makes a grand appearance. Yeah. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priest. And he killed 85 persons who wore the linen ephod that day. Now Doeg has no problem doing this because it's Doeg a Jew. No, he's an Edomite. Does Doeg see the potential to rise in Saul's palace? Sure. This is a brilliant move by Doeg. If I do what Saul tells me, will I get elevated? Sure. Unless God kills him. We'll see in a little bit and see what happens to if he shows back up again. How many people does he kill that day? 85. Yeah. Well, I think they wrapped the priest up in the 85, but 85, 86, one more or less is not going to really be that big of a deal. The dude is a sociopath. Nope. It was just him, because the text says it's just him.
They didn't have weapons.
The priests didn't have weapons. They didn't have any weapons, but the bodyguard stood by and let him do it. So while they didn't kill the priest, they didn't stop the killing of the priest. So are they culpable of killing the priest? Yeah, I think they are. I think it's in Thucydides that it says those who have the power to prevent someone from placing the shackles upon another and not use it are just as guilty as those who put the shackles on, because they had the power to prevent that from happening, and they did not use it. It was the Thessalonian delegation to Sparta. That's how they guilt Sparta into fighting. Doeg kills 85 people, but he does not stop there.
Oxen, donkeys, and sheep.
But they go to Nob. Now here it doesn't. The text isn't clear whether or not it's him alone, or the bodyguards go with him, or some troops go with him. But essentially, they go to Nob and they obliterate the town. They kill everything within the town. Now, let me ask you this question: was there a command of God to kill an entire town of people? Yeah. Did Saul carry that command out? No. He kept for himself the best. He kept for himself the king. Now, in his wicked and corrupted state, he gives an order to obliterate not a wicked, corrupt people, but the very priests that are going to serve in the temple of the Lord. And he orders their destruction to what? All the way down to the animals. You find that interesting, how the perversion of God's command is going on within this man's brain? I'll show you. Now think about, what might be the possibility why he exterminates the entire town? They are all traitors. What does this send a signal to everyone else who would try to aid David? I will kill everybody that sides with this man. Is this the sign of a good, loving, just, kind king? Or is this the sign of the king that the people actually asked for? What was the request for a king? Give us a king, not holy and righteous like you, God, but what? Give us a king who is like all the other kings. Is Saul behaving like a good, godly king, or is he behaving like all the other kings? Behaving like all the other kings. The request for the king that they asked for is the king they got. Do they like this guy? They're waiting for someone to frag him. It means throwing a grenade underneath his bunk and then watching the fireworks go off. Except one. But all the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, but of the sons, Abiathar escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on the day that when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death for all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. David looks back and goes, I knew that dude would sell me out. Wicked character kind of draws to itself wicked character, does it not? Questions. Let's talk about questions. Anybody got questions before we wrap this up? It's almost as bad as Judges, isn't it, Mary? Almost. You got murder and blood on every page. What do you think? As I'm looking up there, there's a gap in the glass. It's for the sniper. Sniper! Questions? Any at all? Saul has begun down the spiral of just demented and, actually, I wouldn't say demented. I would say demonic behavior. Remember, he's being tormented by an evil spirit. He is being haunted, and David used to bring him comfort, but now no more. Have you ever noticed that people like that usually have that one confidant that they can trust, and they usually at first could say what they needed to say? Usually after a while, the more malignant person can't stand any wise counsel and runs them off.
Why would David want to fight him? Every time he did, he got a jab in him.
Every time he did, Saul tried to use him as a pincushion. Well, the good thing is David was safe as long as he didn't move. Because it's well documented Saul couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a spear. He would be better if he walked up and did that. I mean, it's like we're watching Romo play court. I'm sorry. That was a low blow. That. Yeah, that's right. What about all this interplay? You have this king. And notice the phraseology we saw. Is he the king that the people asked for? Every bit of it. We want a king like the world's kings. Now here's the question too. Here's something to think about. Isn't that kind of what we ask for at times when we ask God for things? We want our lives to be just like everybody else's life in the world, but we kind of want to Christianize it. And we see here that when you get something the way you exactly want it, the way you ask for it, you really don't want what you've asked for. You want what God is actually trying to give to you. Notice that had they had not asked for a king, the Davidic monarchy would still come into play, I honestly believe, but the rejection of Samuel and the judges would not have occurred this way. Because who were they actually rejecting when they said we want a king like the world's kings? They're rejecting God as king. And so you have this odd thing, and Saul, a blight. And great thing about Saul, though, is Saul's moral character and demonic possession is going to shove him to the point that all David has to do is breathe. And he is an infinitely better king than Saul. Fair enough? All he's got to do is show up for work on a regular occasion. And he's a better king than Saul, because right now, if you're part of Saul's bodyguard and you just saw him issue a command to wipe out a bunch of unarmed priests, you got to figure that your days are numbered as well. Questions? And if you have them, if you don't, we'll wrap up.
Do you think David ever regretted he didn't get Saul all the way out?
No, I don't think so. And the reason being is I think David understood that it was God's responsibility to take care of Saul and not his. It's kind of...
I don't think the people would have accepted him as freely as they did.
I think, Walter, I think you're on to that there. Had he killed Saul, he would have been seen as a usurper. Justified, he would have still been seen as a usurper, even though he was king. I don't think so, and because it wasn't his to do. And I think that's what was driving David's position. My hands are tied because this is God's anointed man. Now, if God had said, David, tomorrow Saul's going to be asleep in a cave, and I want you to slice and dice, that man had been dead. And so I don't. But again, that's an argument for silence. But I take the two statements that he said, and there isn't in the Hebrew or even in the English, there isn't an equivocation in his voice. I will not. Absolute no. I will not touch the man of God. So I think that's why I go with no. I don't think he was. I think this issue troubles him more because his action of going there gets these men killed. Now he doesn't kill these men, but his actions kill, and that's kind of where you get the interplay with Doeg. I knew that man would sell me out. It could be a veiled threat of I probably should have killed him before I left. That's an argument for silence. But again, there's some people would say that, yeah, I think it would bother him. I don't know, but I would tend to say no. But I also tend to agree with Walter. Had he had killed Saul, he would never have been seen as legitimate heir to the throne.
It took him 7 years to get the country united.
It took him a while. And that's one of the interesting things. A lot of times we see David as the king, and we assume that he was always the king over all 12 tribes. Just like in the Judges period. The judges were regional judges. Few were ever judges of the totality. Most of them were regional judges. A handful of tribes. And so, that's it. Any other questions? Yes?
Did you say there were 2 Goliaths?
No. I said they mentioned Goliath the Philistine as though there were 2 Goliaths. He gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Well, of course it's Goliath. The 7-foot tall guy. Who else could it have been? I mean, that's, you know.
I mean, it's not a little Roman truck sword.
No, it was a huge, it was more, probably more along the line of an Egyptian sickle sword, I would think. That was a fairly common weapon in that era of war. But since they were probably more iron workers, it probably could have taken the form of more of a Greek-style weapon. But we don't know, because the man was so stinking huge.
They said it was, what, 9 foot?
If you do the calculation for cubits into feet, it comes out around 9 foot and some change. The thing is, you're going to have to assume that the way they're using cubit in David's day is the same way they're using cubit in Noah's day. Because, you know, at one time in America, a foot was not 12 inches. Do you not know that? Do you know this? Yeah. At one time in a town, the foot was measured by the first 7 people out the front door of a church. The feet of them. That would have constituted the foot. It wasn't until the U.S. Agricultural Ways and Means comes in and says, no, it's 12 inches. It's 12 inches. Yeah. I don't know, but I took this in a class called Geometric Dimensioning and Tolerancing, Yancey Y14, which I had to have when I was a machinist, and talk about an enjoyable class. It was so mind-numbingly dull. They don't even teach that class anymore because they're well on past that. That was 20 years ago. But that's usually that's what happened. They would, and so when we go back and they discuss things in older times about how long it was, we go and try to apply our measurement to it, and it doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work. You're applying a modern-day unit of measurement onto an ancient unit of measurement, and you have to understand what their unit of measurement was at that time in period of history, so you can be accurate. And so that's why a lot of times we get in trouble when we read back onto. So yeah, I would still say, Walter, you're probably a safe bet with 9 and change. But, you know, I'm not going to go and say he wasn't taller, or, you know. I mean, so.
Didn't the cubic thing change with whoever was the ruler of the day?
Yeah, that's another thing, too. Your links change by who's in charge, too. To some extent. Some of it stays the same. Some of it changes. Just like with wording, how wording morphs, your measurements morph. And so you can have differences. Which is one reason why they believe that the Dome of the Rock is built in the wrong place. And the Temple Mount is not got the Dome of the Rock sitting upon it.
That's that argument.
Huh? Yeah, what about that? I don't know. You know, it's an interesting concept. I don't know if I would have ever have done it. It's just an interesting concept. Yeah, that's about my thinking on it. That's as far as my thinking takes me. It's huge. And here's the thing. Certainly you will get close enough in size. It will present to you the magnitude of what it is.
Proportional within its own.
Yes.
Well, has anything ever been built that big before?
The ark?
Yeah.
No, I'd say not. Which is why I think when they looked at it, they looked and said, "Geez, I don't know what this guy's thinking, but he must be licking some toads."
Well, it took him, 120 years to build?
It took him some time. Yes, it took him well over 100 years to build that bad boy. I wouldn't say it was the most navigable ship either. So, but
All I had to do was bounce around on
Yeah, huh?
It was just built to float. It wasn't propelled to go anywhere. No sails or oars.
No, I mean, you're not rowing that ship. Say again?
Some of the measurements of that ship are still being used in the edge of the day
Your width, length, and height, the measurements.
I wouldn't doubt it. Having not been in the Navy, that doesn't really, you know what I'm saying? It's interesting. And it's cool that how we still use a lot of that stuff from very ancient times. No, that's very interesting with that. Any other questions? Because we can go.
When you pray,
Uh-huh.
you want to be very, very careful how you pray.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a bad episode of The Twilight Zone. You ever remember? How many of y'all remember The Twilight Zone? Picture of man traveling beyond sight and sound. His next destination is the Twilight Zone. And you ever see the one where the genie shows up and the guy says, I want to have all the money in the world. You remember this one? And, well, no, he starts off with, I want all the money in the world. And so he gets all the money. And so nobody has any money. And so somebody comes in to try to barter for goods. And all of a sudden he gets that guy's stuff because that became the new currency. And everybody hated that guy. He said, well, that's not what I wanted. He says, that's exactly what you asked for. You asked for all the money in the world. You now have everything. And so he modifies his. It's kind of like that, except for the fact that it's not a TV show, but it's a painful learning experience for the children of Israel. Why? Because the reason why they asked for a king was not because all the other kings had great examples of kings. They just didn't want to follow God anymore. And so they asked for a king that guy looked just like all the other world's kings, and they got it. Because they had a godly king. They had God as their king. Think about it. Every time they went out for battle and he was with them, they didn't lose. They're like, I don't know, the Carolina Panthers in this season of football. They pummeled somebody today 38-0. I don't know who it was. No, it was the Falcons, because I saw your head move. I mean, it was like watching somebody beat a small child. Cincinnati lost too, but they were undefeated. But now we've digressed. So, yes.
I don't know, History 2 and American movie, and they're having a whole series of the lost books of the Bible and non-included and book of. What are all those from?
Those are probably most of the books that are not included in the Bible. The Old Testament books that are not included are the books like Maccabees, Ezra. Ezra is what we call a pseudepigrapha. What that means is that is a book in which the writer decides that his name, Joe Schlub, is not enough to get credibility. So he picks a guy from the Old Testament that has high degree of credibility and assumes his name. It's a nom de plume. It's a ghost name. And so he writes it in the authority of Ezra, even though his name is Joe Schlub. And so would you read a book whose author is lying about his name? No, I wouldn't, because he begins with a lie. Maccabees is great history. Maccabees is really good history. Both the Protestant church affirms that Maccabees is good history, but it's not Scripture. It's great intertestamental history, but it's not Scripture. And so you have those books in the Old Testament there. Then you have books like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Barnabas, the Gospel of Peter. All those are dated to the 2nd century, 3rd century A.D. So they are written much later, the late 2nd century. So they're written much later. The Council of Nicaea in 325, while they're dealing with Arius and his shenanigans, and if you weren't here for Sunday, Nicholas, the man which we base Santa Claus off of, is listening to Arius give his doctrine of God being the Son of God being a created being and not fully deity. And if you're on Facebook, go to my page. I've posted where, what's her name from Pastor Smiley's wife with the big teeth. Victoria says that Jesus was a man until God touched him with the Spirit of God and indwelled him, and then he became deity. You're like, no. St. Nicholas punched a dude out in front of the emperor for a statement like that. In the Council of Nicaea, what you had is you had certain texts that the Arians loved. And some of these texts were more of what they call the Gnostic Gospels. And the Gnostic Gospels, basically where Gnostic means secret knowledge. This is one of the people that Paul wrestles with. I believe it is in Ephesians. John wrestles with the Gnostics. Paul does some in Galatians, but he's dealing more with the Judaizers there. And Peter, I think, deals with some of the Gnostics.
Gnostics also, what group said that, the body and the spirit were separate?
That would be the Gnostics. That's a very Gnostic understanding. There's the and you can break it down and basically do this. Body bad, spirit good. Body bad, spirit good. So as long as you did something in your body, drinking to be drunk, having sex, killing people, that's the body. Just as long as the spirit wasn't a conspirator along with it, you're good. I kind of like that at times, because there are times I like going in traffic. You're in the left lane. Body bad, spirit good. Body bad, spirit so good. So at Nicaea, the big thing now, because we read back onto it and we say that Constantine wasn't a Christian, and here's the great thing about Constantine's conversion. There's no one that knows other than God and Constantine whether or not he is a Christian. Just like I can't look at any of you and say you're a Christian. I can judge your actions. But I can't say definitively that you're a Christian. Why? Because that's a situation that is between you and God. Sure, I can look at your motives. Sure, I can look at your life. Sure, I can look at your fruit. Sure, I can look at a lot of these things and say, I believe this individual is a Christian. So to say Constantine isn't a Christian is kind of a straw man argument. So at Nicaea, the big thing nowadays is, well, Constantine comes and he tells the church how they're going to get their Bible. And not only that, is he going to tell the church how Trinitarian and the deity of the Son comes into about, and so he basically makes a decision. Well, the problem is that doesn't fit with the Council of Nicaea. At Nicaea, Athanasius is declared the champion, and he wins for a little bit. But then the Arian forces gain the ear of Constantine, and Athanasius is exiled, and Arius is brought back out of exile. And this goes back and forth 5 times. Finally, Constantine sees enough of it as the emperor. He's convinced by the pro-Trinitarian, the pro-hypostatic union forces. He banishes Arius finally, and the church stays Trinitarian. When it comes to the text, most Christian churches had manuscripts, not a complete New Testament, but had a great deal of text that we have in our Bibles today. Many of them, if there were any other than the other Gnostics, especially in the 2nd century, they had been rejected by most of the churches except for the Gnostic crowd and the Arian crowd. And so when they come to Nicaea, it's not that they came and they said, oh, I like that one. No, I don't like this Gospel of Thomas thing. Oh, I like that one. If you read a lot of those, there's some weird cryptic stuff in there. The one about Mary Magdalene is the one, especially if you were Dan Brown fans, that whole thing about Mary Magdalene being pregnant and with Jesus' baby. The problem is, in that manuscript, there's like 4 words that are legible. Mary, I think it is Mary, Jesus who loved Mary. That's all that's in the sentence. And from that, they extrapolate that Jesus and Mary were secret husband and wives, and they had a kid. That's a pretty big jump. Because in the New Testament, it says Jesus, or the disciple whom Jesus loved, and we don't know that John and Jesus were macking outside the back. Where were they? That's a common phraseology in Greek. So they make this jump. So here's the thing about a lot of those books that are Gnostic, that we would call the Gnostic Gospels. Contained in them, you see a Jesus who is not holy. In one of them, Jesus is hit in the head with a rock. He turns and he looks at the kid and then kills the kid. Does that compare with the Christ of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Not at all. In other passages, what we have are fragmentations and poor manuscripting. It looks like you have a move, and you see this today. We have groups and cults that come along and pull from the text. I'll give you a huge one that's big and popular, and they're trying so hard to be recognized as Christians. Can you know where I'm headed? Mormons. They've even written a New Testament to the New Testament. This is not uncommon. And so the way the church has looked at it, and the way I look at it, is many of those are to be rejected. Just flat out rejected. Because they are not Scripture, they are not text. If you want to read them, read them. I've read some of them. I've read some of Thomas, and I've read enough. It's kind of like reading bad theology. I've read enough of it to go, oh, interesting. That's where I kind of take the stand on that. Any other questions?
The life of Saul is a prime example of what happens when God removes his hand from you.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. What you see with Saul is something that could actually happen to any and every one of us if we choose to go our own way outside the will of God. Or countries. John Calvin had a quote that said, when God is about ready to punish a nation, he gives them an immoral king. So think about that one. Well, he uses the word leader. He doesn't use king. He uses the word leader. God gives them an immoral leader. So, yeah, I would think that would be president as well. So, you know, and that's okay because we have, look, here's the great thing about the story with Saul. Who comes after Saul? David. Israel goes into its, you see Israel go into its greatest depth of depravity up to this point, I would say. Then comes David, and Israel comes out of it to its highest growth and economic wealth and power that it will ever have under David, and then under Solomon, and then when Rehoboam comes, that turkey just ruins it all. And it slides down again. So, one of the great things about the text is right after great depravity, going back to the book of Judges, right after the wickedness, the people repent, there's peace in the land, and there's prosperity, and there's great things. The key is you got to break the cycle. Both personally, corporately as a people, and universally as a nation. So, don't get despair in the fact that we may have an individual put in power so right before God punishes us, because as long as the people return to the Lord, we have seen, because we have the historical record of the text, that when that happens, great things happen. Yeah, kind of. I like that verse. If my people who are called by my name. Anything else? We can answer questions as far afield. I know it's 7 o'clock, so Mickey's hand is a little... Actually, that clock is on time right now. Will wonders never cease? I got 7:04. So why don't we circle up and dismiss with prayer?